Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is a podcast where we ask the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George Parrett, and you're listening to episode 40, where we ask, could technology make us more active? Hello, and thank you so much for downloading this week's episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. You can find all of our previous episodes on our website, which is deloitte.co.uk/greenroompodcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And today we're talking about how technology can make us more active and how can technology unlock sport a bit. And I'm joined by my wonderfully active co-host, Lizzie Elston. How are you, Lizzie?
Well, good morning, George. I'm perhaps not quite as active this morning as I normally am. The poor dog hasn't actually had her walk yet today, which is my normal daily exercise. But no, I'm very well, thank you. It's great to be back on the podcast after a bit of a break. So really looking forward to getting stuck into this episode and meeting our guests.
That's right. We've got some fantastic guests who you'll introduce shortly. But just as a bit of an intro about what we're talking about today, we're sort of looking at the technology and the role it can play to get people a bit more active and a bit more included in sport. But clearly technology can be part of the problem sometimes. I think we're all a bit guilty of swiping our phones a bit too much and sitting on the sofa watching TV a bit. But hopefully we're going to explore a bit about how technology and digital can be part of the solution in terms of getting people out of their chairs and onto courts, onto fields, and into their trainers a bit more. So, but Lizzie, who do we have in the green room today to talk us through this?
Well, I'm delighted to introduce our guests today. We have, first of all, Judy Murray, OBE. Judy is a former Scottish international tennis player with 64 national titles to her name. She became Scottish national coach in 1995 and initiated the Scottish Development Schools programme, which produced 4 Davis Cup players and 1 Fed Cup player, including her Grand Slam winning sons, Jamie and Andy. She's also focused on increasing the profile of and numbers in women's tennis across players and coaches. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Sounds fun.
And we're also joined by Mark Lillie. Mark is a global technology, strategy and transformation leader at Deloitte. Mark has led numerous business and digital transformation programs and heads up our CIO program and technology research and insights. Outside of the firm, Mark is passionate about sport with extensive involvement in the London 2012 Olympics and sports coaching. He has also served as the chairman of the board of SportsAid. Welcome, Mark.
Hi guys, great to be here.
So it's the point in the podcast where we all get a bit warmed up with an icebreaker. And the question has just popped up here. And the question is this: what television show would you like to live in if you could? There was me thinking it would be a sports-related icebreaker, but no. What TV show would you like to live in if you could? Who would like to kick off?
I don't mind diving into that one, Lizzie, because I like to watch nice TV, I like to get that warm feeling inside, and I can't handle anything just too stressful or too drama or too scary. So I'll say something like Schitt's Creek, which is a really good, feel good sort of program. I think I'd be very happy to live in that world. That sounds quite fun.
That would mean living in a motel, though, wouldn't it? Is that really what you?
It's a simple life, yeah.
Life, fair enough. Yeah, I guess so. How about our guests, Mark or Judy? Any thoughts here?
Judy, it's got to be sport. It's got to be. I mean, for me, it's BBC Sports Personality of the Year show. It is the highlight of the year. Just talking about it, the tingles are sort of going up the back of the hairs on my neck. It's the music, it's the highlights of the year. I was lucky enough to go to one, actually. I think it was after the Athens Games in 2004. Well, it was still at BBC TV Centre, and it was just ridiculous. My heroes were there. So I would just love to live in that and be part of that. I think that's got to be it for me.
I'm going to go completely against that and say that one of the shows that I watched most recently was called Emily in Paris, and I watched it with my daughter-in-law, and it really took me back. I studied French at university. I had to spend a bit of time in France learning to speak the language, And it really took me back to a time when I was younger, but it also made me realise how much the world had changed in that time. And I'd quite like to have been a bit part in Emily in Paris.
That would be wonderful. I hear where you're coming from on that one, definitely. And I think I would like to join Sir David Attenborough on any of his TV programmes, if I'm honest. But number one, I would join him with the mountain gorillas in the jungles of Uganda. I think I'd be pretty happy up there, away from it all and at one with nature.
That sounds great. That sounds great. Brilliant. Well, I think we need to get stuck into this week's topic, really. So I think, Mark and Lillie, and Mark and Judy, thank you so much for joining us this week. And clearly, sport is a huge part of your lives. But maybe just to help our listeners get to know you a little bit better, could you talk about why sport has been so important to you and how it's evolved during your careers?
I was an average sports bod at school. I kind of, had a go at everything. And then for me, I mean, it was mentioned in the intro bit, I just, when it was back in sort of 2002-3, when there were rumours of us bidding for the games, I just thought, my goodness me, it's not going to happen again in our lifetime. I mean, what an opportunity. So I wrote a letter to the chair of the bid committee, and then off the back of that sort of got involved and was seconded into the bid team and really got under the skin of that. And then 2012 itself was the most, talk about, we've just had a Jubilee, right? So, it makes you feel proud to be British, and there's the Queen doing her Paddington Bear thing, and there's a bit of humour and sport and the vibe on the tube, all of that business. And so from that, I got involved in sports aid, and I'm lucky enough at Deloitte to lead a bunch of our relationships with the LTA, so opening up tennis, which we'll talk about no doubt at some point, and also the games themselves, so the IOC, we're top sponsors of the games now, which is absolutely brilliant. So I just love it. I'm a big Liverpool fan, amongst other things, and we won the cricket. I managed to go to a day's cricket. So when I'm not working, I'm busy watching and supporting. I guess that's how I'd characterise my involvement.
How about you, Judy?
Well, I grew up in a very sporty family. My mum and dad both did a lot of sport. My dad had been a footballer, and they actually took the decision, I think when I was 10, to send me to a girls' school that specialised, of course, in many things, but particularly sport, because it would give me the opportunity to do all the things that I would like to do that probably weren't available at that time within the state school that I went to. And I will always be very grateful to them for that, because I played in, I think, every team that the school had. I would do everything. Sport was just a way of life for me. So being active, encouraging others nowadays to get active or take up a sport is a big part of my life. So despite there being really no infrastructure for tennis in Scotland, we're a country that has really rubbish weather and no indoor when I was growing up. So I did tennis in the summer and I did badminton in the winter. They would be my main sports. And I played for Scotland at both of them. And, I grew up in the wooden racket era, an era where there were no coaches. You learned from your parents, and then you learned how to play by playing with the older members at the club. The world is a very different place now in terms of coaches everywhere and indoor facilities. So I've kind of really watched my sport change over many, many years. And I started out in coaching when my kids were tiny. I went over to volunteer at our local club, discovered there was still no coaches there, and started to work with some of the older kids. And that was really how I got into coaching as a volunteer, worked my way up without really meaning to. It was more like, I want to help the kids that I'm working with, and I don't know enough, so I need to go away and find out how to coach and how to coach better. And worked my way up to become the Scottish national coach for 10 years, the GB Fed Cup captain for 5 years, and obviously travelled a lot with my kids on the junior and the adult tennis circuit, because somebody's got to cramp their style, haven't they?
Yeah, I can just imagine that kind of we all grow up and we're like, oh, mum, and it must have been moments, but that's fantastic. And I mean, that's so interesting to hear. We all know how important sport is for our health, and that we could all probably do a bit more of it. But sort of, how do you feel individuals but also communities all benefit by being more active?
Well, there's the obvious physical benefits, but I think there's also the social benefits that go with sport. I think, especially at recreational level, I've always been a huge believer in that. And of course, it comes from my background of growing up in a small town where the community sports clubs, tennis, golf, badminton, they were all run by members of the local community, and almost all of them volunteers. And my parents are very big community people. So I think we are all products of our environment. So for me, that whole thing of bringing people into a central place where you're bound by a shared love of, well, a sport in this case, that sense of belonging is incredibly important within community. And being active, enjoying the outdoors, we all know that even more than ever since being locked down in the pandemic, for our health and our well-being, and the life lessons that you can learn from being part of a sport are second to none.
Judy, that's where I was going to go. I mean, the life lessons, just in teamwork, hard work, commitment, training, what you get out is what you put in. But I mean, certainly in the life of business, I mean, you've getting on with people, the different roles you play in teams, so much of that can be learned from sport. And the mental health and well-being. I mean, I know we all have our ways of staying on top of it, but there's nothing like physical. It's proven now. Physical exercise really, really helps with that. And yeah, I mean, in lockdown, wasn't it horrific when you couldn't get out there and do some of those things? Unfortunately, tech kind of stepped in and we could do the Joe Wick stuff, and all sorts of innovations came in when the physical world stopped and the digital world sort of had to step into that breach. And I think there's a lot of sort of powerful legacy actually over the last couple of years, even though it's, let's be clear, been desperately hard for many people.
That's right, Mark. And I mean, I'm slightly feeling guilty of that mid-morning biscuit I had just now, and maybe I need to balance that out with a bit of a jog later. But I think
cold showers. You need to have cold showers, George. That's the big thing nowadays.
I mean, you're not selling that very well, Mark. But I think, what you touched on is right on the money there. It's when the physical world stopped during the pandemic, the digital world stepped in, and I'd like to get both your thoughts about your relationship with technology, and as I mentioned in the beginning, in the world of professional sport, technology is fantastic at keeping us kind of glued to our seats. But what's been your relationship with technology during your careers in sport? Perhaps Judy first.
I think that my first flirtation, shall we say, with technology was way back in 2004, and I went to a conference because I was always trying to learn how to become a better coach, to look after the Scottish players better. And there really wasn't anyone for me to learn from in Scotland. Nobody had ever aspired to be a great player or a great coach, mainly because we had no indoor facilities and therefore you couldn't play all year round. So I went to a conference and I listened to some squash people talking about how they were using technology to analyse matches and predictions of. Basically, their presentation was around, they had a player, a British player who was within the top 10. How did they get her to number one? And the analysis that they had done on all the players ahead of her. And they showed how they broke the court up into zones. They numbered each of the zones. They analysed all of these matches, and they could predict where players were going to hit certain shots to and from, depending on what zone they were in. So you could work out the tactics, how best to play against them to disadvantage them. And that totally appealed to me because, as someone who was never formally coached, I learned to play the game by playing the game, by observing what was happening on the other side of the net, thinking about what I was, not just about what I was doing myself, but what's my opponent doing? How do I best expose the weaknesses or make life difficult for the person on the other side? And so I took that back and I went to the Scottish Institute of Sport and I said, we need something like this for tennis. I could easily create something. And we did. We went ahead and we created something. And when I went to the US Open Juniors in 2004, I had 3 boys playing in that. And I took a video analyst with me from the Scottish Institute of Sport. And we stuck the clunky video camera to the back fence and we filmed the opponents, whoever they might play next. We didn't film our players because we knew enough about our players. And we took the footage and it took all night to analyse it. But I had my eyes and my pen and pencil, and I was watching those players, and I was writing down exactly the things I wanted her to pick out. So although I wasn't doing the technology myself, I could see how it could help me when I can't watch three opponents if they're all on at the same time. And that was my first thing with it. And I was the first person within tennis to be doing anything like that. And now when I look 18 years later, every player after a match in a major event gets a USB stick or a link with the match, the whole match on it. So nobody has to have the clinky video camera with the tape to the back wall or whatever it was. You also get access to all the Hawkeye data. So whether you're a player or a coach, you can pick up all of that. So I started to work with it in a small way, but I really enjoyed it. It was incredibly time consuming. And therefore, if you were the coach and you're having to look after, in my case, very young players, you were really having to work through the night to try and pull everything together. So having the luxury of taking somebody with me was a big thing. But I could see it coming, and I could see how it would work. I probably would never have imagined that it would have blown up in the way that it has. But it is so easy for coaches and players to access data and video footage of their matches in a way that it wasn't back then.
I think it's transformed elite sport. Data and analytics has transformed elite sport. The ability to measure almost anything. I mean, Hawkeye, VAR, and then that elite sport end is then transposed or translated into the way we all consume and observe and watch, and all the different angles and the replays and all the rest of it. I mean, my personal little journey, I mean, I've had this on my wrist, not this particular one because they don't, last forever, but good old Fitbit. But there's also, there are all sorts of wearables now, and it's amazing the data it gives you. And it's interesting to try and work out how your body reacts to different things.
So, I mean, that's so interesting. We've talked a bit about your examples of technology, and Judy, it's fascinating to hear about the early days of bringing in the technology to tennis. It would be helpful now just to talk a bit about opening up sport more broadly and the role that technology plays in that. What's your view on the role that tech can play to get anybody into sport, no matter your background, age, or ability?
I think that there is so much information available online nowadays that I was talking to somebody earlier this morning about Jamie getting his first flat in 2007 and learning how to cook. And he taught himself to cook from YouTube, from watching Gordon Ramsay. And he'd be on the phone saying, "Oh, scrambled egg, mum, with creme fraiche and this and it and that and all the rest of it." But it's the same for sport. You can go online, and there are always great starter instructional videos, ideas for developing the skills that you need to be able to play it. There's great examples from the top players, from recreational players. I think it's just so easy to find a way to learn by watching, and we all learn best by copying. And things are so visible now. I can remember days when people used to bring books and try and learn from reading a book with drawn instruction. And now I think it's so easy to be able to follow videoed instruction and real life examples. And I think, like I said earlier, these apps that you can get to you can film yourself, and you can put yourself, kind of transpose yourself against, I don't know, if I'm learning how to play golf. So let's say I transposed myself against Katrina Matthew and see where my swing goes compared to hers. I can actually teach myself. So I think, from a financial point of view, and I do it in my own time point of view, or also if I'm not confident, I'm shy, perhaps have a disability, I think it really has opened things up so much for sport to be learned in a completely different way, and without necessarily having to always access a facility or a club and pay money to do it. I do a lot of work in rural and disadvantaged areas, trying to take tennis into those areas. And I know that not everybody has money to pay for it. So actually being able to learn online is incredibly important. And we saw just how simple that became because of everything that went on through the pandemic. Everybody was creating things to share with others.
I totally. I mean, I was going to add on to that, which is the engagement. If you can engage with particularly the younger people, I mean, some of the things that athletes doing their fun TikToks, or some of the sports clubs doing things. You know, if you can get people into the sport that maybe initially may not be the physical side, but you engage with the athletes, you engage with the clubs. To make it fun and interesting and you know, gamified, if you see what I mean. I think that's and you know, that experience can be often, you know, one of the first ways to sort of get excited and interested in something. And then if you can make it easy for people, I mean, in tennis, the strategy for tennis in Britain's tennis opened up. What does that mean? More hands-on rackets. How can you do that? Make it easier for people to find a court, to find a player of their similar ability. You know, if anyone has played tennis at a very average level like me, it's awful playing with someone who's way better than you or way worse than you. You know, you're embarrassed if they're way better than you and you're feeling you're letting them down. But if you're playing with somebody who's not as good, then it's different. Making it easy for people to engage in a way that works for them, making it simple and straightforward. That, to me, is where tech can really open up sport.
I think that's right, Mark, because we just had half term, and I woke up one morning. I thought I'm going to take my 3-year-old daughter Annabelle for swimming, and I couldn't work out. Maybe it's me being a bit of a Luddite, maybe, but I was trying to work out how can I book a slot or get the right kiddie slot in a swimming pool near us. In the end of the day, I had to pick up the phone and give them a call, which seems a bit sort of archaic now. But and I think Sport England had a stat which says only 34% of people say that it's easy to book a sport or fitness class online. And I know you've done quite a lot. You mentioned it there, Mark. You've done quite a lot of work with the LTA in terms of opening up tennis. Could you talk a bit more about how technology has been an enabler for that?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, we're chuffed to bits to be the digital transformation partner of the LTA. So that's, I mean, what's their goal and mission? It's to, I mean, I said it earlier, get hands-on rackets, more hands-on rackets, more diverse hands-on rackets that don't normally hold a racket, keeping them in the sport. There's something like 6,000 coaches, accredited coaches in Britain. You need those coaches to be right on top of having the maximum impact they can. You know, it's that one-to-many model. If we can all think back to our school days, our younger times, where you need that inspirational teacher. Sometimes it's mum and dad, but sometimes it's also that teacher who keeps you into the sport. So it's how can you not just engage with fans and players, but how can the coaches be really engaged and right with the latest information and news that they can then part on to young people, and technology enables you to do that in a most engaging way. So that's the strategy being followed. And I have to say I think it's a bit of an exemplar for all sports in Britain. I mean, you want to make it easy and straightforward, engaging and fun, and keep as many young people in the sport as possible, and then attract older people back to the sport as well. Because we talked earlier about the health benefits. It's, sport should be for all abilities to have fun with. So, I think tech is fundamental to that, to be honest.
I think that was a really good point about the booking of facilities, because if you want to try something for the first time, you need somewhere to play and you need someone to play with.
Yeah.
And while I would definitely have been one of those old school people who would say public parks need to be open to everybody and free of charge, I can also see now that the way the world is, we are used to booking things online and buying things online, but also there's a security in knowing that you've booked the court and you can get on it when you get there, rather than you trek down with your rackets. And especially if you're a younger person, it's easy for older people, even older teenagers, to knock you off and you're waiting there forever. So actually to know that you can go and play. So therefore the online booking opportunity, I've turned myself around of that and say, actually, I think that's a better way to do it.
And so specifically, Mark, what is the technology which is needed to make that happen?
It's essentially a marketplace. Like it's having the inventory, so knowing which courts in tennis, which courts are available at what time, having the demand, so people booking, and then be able to securely, to Judy's point, I couldn't agree more, trust in the process, trust in the booking. It sounds easy, but the challenge is bringing all that together with a platform that's open and accessible and straightforward.
I think it's really interesting what you said earlier, Judy, about how a lot of your drive and growth in your career was driven by the fact that actually you didn't have any resources at the start. You didn't have any indoor courts, and you had to kind of scrabble around and build that up from scratch. But I'd be interested in any more examples about how you're seeing technology changing sport as we know it, whether that's for players or for amateurs or for future professionals. How can we keep unlocking it to target those sort of the up and coming generation, I suppose?
I think one of the things that I have realised for quite some time now is that tennis is competing with so many other things for kids, teens, and adults' attention that we have to make it fun, we have to make it doable, we have to make it accessible, and we have to make it affordable. And I think we have to learn how to use technology to our best advantage. And so whether that is collecting data on what our competitors are doing, other sports, other leisure pursuits, what age groups and what genders are playing tennis at what times of the day, for how long, for how many times, understanding all your different user groups and what best appeals to those user groups. I think that is really important, and making it as fun, doable, accessible, affordable as we can to as many of those user groups as possible. And what Mark said about the coaches or the teachers who are delivering sport, to keep them as informed and supported as best as we can, whether that is with video resource, whether it's online learning, whether it's practical workshops, keep them enthused and feeling part of it. But for me, the Pied Pipers in sport are absolutely worth their weight in gold. So it is often just as much about what you know as how you are, how you deliver.
Did you know at Deloitte we support social enterprises through our 5 Million Futures programme? Like Change Please. They use 100% of the profits from their award-winning coffee to help people experiencing homelessness. They offer training, employment, and ongoing support with housing, finances, and therapy. Why not sign up at the Change Please Coffee Club to receive weekly deliveries of coffee beans, or to try out one of their blends? Just head to changeplease.org or check out the show notes. Now, back to our topic of the day. Mark, you mentioned earlier the work that we're doing with the LTA. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and sort of how we're working with LTA coaches and volunteers?
Yeah. I mean, as I say, the whole strategy of the LTA is tennis opened up, so more hands on rackets. So what we're trying to do is help them accelerate that digitally. That's really at the heart of it. How can you open up tennis faster using digital? And to Judy's point, it's about thinking really carefully about your stakeholder groups. It could be schools, could be coaches, we talked a bit about. It could be fans, it could be players, it could be parents. And then you've got quite a lot of people, maybe a coach, a parent, and maybe a teacher as well. And how do you go about supporting them in their role, and ultimately helping retain more children playing the sport, attract people coming back into the sport, make it more inclusive. I think paddle is super exciting. So the LTA, obviously look after tennis and they also have the rights around paddle. And paddle, if anyone's not been to sort of Spain or Portugal, I think increasingly the US actually, is huge, incredibly social sport, a bit sort of half tennis, half squash, if you like. Smaller space, so actually it can be more inclusive if you think inner cities and so on. You can, because it's got sort of walls, you can think about some cool artwork that would encourage younger people to sort of be, it's a cool place to be. You can imagine little stands where you can put your mobile phone up and video stuff, and you can place into social media if that was your thing. So I think certain things like that start to get super exciting, actually. Different formats of the game, appeal for different audience groups. And again, just trying to sort of make it fun. I mean, I think what we're also trying to do is look that little bit step ahead as well. So all things sort of metaverse and that sort of virtual realities, second life type thing. I mean, at the the Australian Open this year, they had a sort of you had to get your VR headsets on. You could sort of wander around the tournament, go into places that previously only players could go, have a look around the sort of the dressing room, walk out into the court, have a look at it, all a little bit avatar-y, but actually gave you a really good insight to what it may be like as you sort of wander around. But I think we're just scratching the surface around that.
And actually, Mark, it's great that you mentioned the metaverse there. It's a fantastic plug for another episode that we've done recently, which you can find in the feed. So please do subscribe to the podcast. And actually, we recently, looked at another piece of technology around augmented reality. And I was having a play before this podcast with a tube of tennis balls that we gave to about 54 young people at the National Tennis Centre in Roehampton a few weeks ago. And on this tube of tennis balls was a QR code, and when you scanned it with your phone, out popped an avatar of Judy Murray, telling a bit about her background and inviting the children to go watch the Queen's Championship. So it's just another example of how technology can open up the sport and make people feel included into something which can be a bit inaccessible sometimes. I think you also touched on a point, and I'll just quite quickly share an experience with my daughter, my 6-year-old daughter, who this summer has started doing a bit of cricket with the ECB's All Stars cricket program, and it's and actually is a great example about how a sport's not just about technology; it's about how do you create that inclusivity, open it up from a diversity perspective as well. And I think. I'm a father of daughters, and it has been a little bit challenging sometimes to find appropriate kind of sports programs and things which are which are like quite inclusive for girls, I find. And Judy, how have you sort of taken on that challenge in your career in terms of trying to open up to new demographics? I mean, there's so many distractions for I don't know, my girls are constantly distracted by different things and in their lives, but how can you bridge that gap and make things more inclusive when we're talking about sport?
Yeah, I've actually done a lot of work, but the last 8 years, I've run a couple of programs. The first one was called Tennis on the Road. It was basically a van full of equipment, and myself and another coach, we worked about 100 days a year, taking tennis into rural and disadvantaged areas of Scotland. So basically, we targeted teachers, parents, volunteers, club members, if there was a club, coaches of other sports, and we basically showed them how to get others started using whatever space they had, whether that was the church hall, the school playground, an astro pitch, a running track. So we invested in the adults because the adults will make things happen for the kids in those areas. Whereas if you go in and you do a great big splash with the kids and you leave and you never go back, it's a one-off hit that goes absolutely nowhere. So we would go in each of the areas that we invested about 3 years each time, because when you take a sport into brand new audiences, you really need to spend enough time to have any chance to make it stick. And you have to invest in the people in the community, and you have to work with any other partners, whether that's schools or other charities, other sporting organisations, because together, collectively, you can make things happen. So that was a big thing, and we left kit bags as well. So we tried to make it as accessible and doable as we could, and we also gave them links to all the videoed content on our website. And I morphed that into my foundation, Judy Murray Foundation, very imaginatively named. And it's been a big thing for me, because unless you really increase your workforce, it's very difficult to increase your numbers. And the other thing that I created in 2014 was a program called Miss Hits. And that was born out of my Fed Cup days, when I realized we're not getting enough girls coming into the game or staying in the game. And when we looked at why little girls were not staying in the game, the mixed groups, as you mentioned, the mixed groups was the number one thing. I don't like the boys. Little boys are more robust, more physical, more competitive, and they often can intimidate little girls. So if you start with a mixed group, you usually lose the little girls somewhere along the line. So I created an all-girl program that would encourage more women to deliver it, because it was non-technical, and it was all about building a friendship group, developing the coordination skills that you need to be able to play a difficult sport like tennis, and learning a bit about our sport through the Miss Hits characters, who were 6 cartoon characters who each represented a 10-stroke, like Faith forehand, Bella backhand, and so forth. So, it hit a lot of things. It was the all-girl thing, as you were talking about, the need for that, the friendship groups that keep girls in any activity. It's the coordination skills that allow you to be able to play tennis, and selling them our sport in a fun, little girl-friendly way.
So, Judy, no doubt you are a role model to many, as are your two incredible boys. But the power of role models and seeing people like you succeeding and believing you can give it a go as well. Tell us a little bit about the power of role models and how we can sort of use that to encourage more people into sport.
Yeah, role models are, they're your shop window. I mean, I remember doing something with Seb Coe years ago, or listening to him talking, actually. It was before the Commonwealth Games, I think in 2014, he came up to Glasgow. And he said, your role models are one thing, but any sport is only as good as its grassroots. But you need your role models to be the motivation and the inspiration. But you actually need the role models on the ground, whether that's the teachers or the coach in the local club. You need role models at every level of sport to make it vibrant. It's not just about what you see on the telly. There's your marketing done for you. But I think also what Mark said about getting people close to the action. So the importance of having major events across different parts of the country in different formats to allow you to build a fan base. And I think in tennis, I saw that evolving enormously over the years, from the Davis Cup in particular, the success that we had in the Davis Cup, and we had about 7 years in a row where we had just a run of home ties. And it was amazing because it was at the height of Andy's success. And of course, we went on to win the Davis Cup in 2015. But the fan cohort that was created from that has remained, and I'm sure will remain, and has started to follow the Fed Cup, which is now the Billie Jean King Cup, which, when I did my first Fed Cup as a captain, one man and his dog was watching us in Israel. Nobody came to watch us. Nobody knew who hardly anyone knew what the Fed Cup was. But that, it's coming into its own now. And that fan cohort, it's so much easier to get fans behind a team than it is behind an individual, because you all go and you get the atmosphere. You're either supporting one team or the other. And you don't get that in tennis very often because most of the tournaments are individuals. So for me, role models are incredibly important, and role models who need to be visible. But role models are not just those who excel at the top of the game. There are role models all the way down, and we should celebrate them as well.
Oh, very much so, very much so. Judy and Mark, it's been so interesting listening to you, and I think we could keep going all day. It's so fascinating, but in the interest of time, we do need to wrap up, and so I'm going to come to the big question for each of you to provide an answer to, please. And the question is, could technology make us more active?
Yeah, for sure, technology can make us more active. I think when you initially listen to something like that, you think, technology? No, of course it couldn't, but of course it could. And if I think during the pandemic of the things that, I'm an active person, I like to be active, but I was trying to find things that I could do just in the house that were easy for me to access. YouTube was a great place to go, and I downloaded apps like Yoga Go, and it gives me 15 minutes or so of different yoga exercises. I follow this lady, she's one of my best friends now online. Well, I don't know her. I talk to her and she tells me what to do, and I can follow. This instruction is great, but I feel like I'm not doing it on my own. I'm doing it with her. There's I think it's called the Happy Mile, and it basically, you just follow this woman and you'll be marching or skipping or whatever. You can do it in a tiny little space in your kitchen, and it stops when you've done a mile, and it's literally, 10 or 12 minutes of activity. But if I don't like her music, I put her on mute. I just copy her. I put my own music on. And what that made me realize is that anybody can do this, and it's fun. It's about finding things that you enjoy doing and that you can do. You've got the space to do the equipment if you need equipment to do it. But actually, with any of those things, I didn't need any equipment. So I really believe that in something as simple as that, it can really open the door to whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you can access space-wise, whatever you can afford finance-wise. I think it is more doable than ever before if you have the will to do it.
So I am in violent agreement with Judy, and I think technology is so embedded in everything that we do our lives, whether it's traveling to work, whether it's how we consume news, sports results, the people we like, we're interested in their lives, whatever it may be. Technology is so totally embedded in what we do and how we do it, that it has the potential to nudge us when we need nudging, as the potential to give us data, to give us that little nudge where, my friend's done more steps than me in a day, or have you seen this discount to the local tennis club. It's the way in which we engage with each other, way we connect with each other, way we connect with what our passions are. And I think if organizations are able to enhance it and use it in a way to target those different customer groups, goodness me, it's the opportunity for us all to get more active and frankly have a load more fun with people who we enjoy being with and learn something while we're doing it, both in terms of hopefully sporting prowess, but maybe also being better people at the same time as well.
Well, Mark and Judy, I'm for one, I'm feeling very inspired to get off the sofa and put the trainers on today. So thank you so much for all your time and all the work that you're doing as well. I think it's just fantastic, and it's been a great discussion. And we haven't even asked Judy whether she still does the paso doble in the kitchen, but we'll save that for next time. We'll save that for next time. But thank you so much for coming.
I don't.
Mark and Judy, thank you so much for coming, and very grateful to have you on the podcast.
You're welcome. Nice to meet you, Mark. Everybody else. Bye.
Bye, Judy.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We'll be back next time with another big question. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.